It's July 1943. We're in New York City. Skyscrapers, barely 40 years old, most of them, tower overhead. Life is never slow here, but Manhattan's moving a little more sluggishly today. It's swelteringly hot. Over on the west side, the traffic moves slowly over melting tarmac. On a regular block is a regular building, divided into regular offices. From a window on the third floor, you can see the surface of the Hudson in the middle distance, glinting in the sun. Inside the office, a fan slices the humid air and rearranges it without doing much to lower the temperature. This is a true story, despite how fantastical it might sound, and it begins right here in 1943 on this blistering July day at the headquarters of Ray Schindler. And there, across the room, reclining in his chair amidst his papers and files, is the man himself. Ray Schindler's a private detective. He's the boss of a highly successful agency called the Schindler Bureau of Investigation. He's got an army of detectives on the payroll. Ray has a taste for good living. His figure shows how much he likes dining in the best restaurants. He has a lifestyle to maintain, which means his services don't come cheap. But then again, he is the best detective money can buy. Across the desk from Ray sits a young woman with her wavy auburn hair and aristocratic good looks. She looks a little like Katharine Hepburn. Nancy de Médigny, formerly Oakes, is 19 years old. She was born into money, a lot of money. But that needn't stop Ray feeling sorry for her. She's a damsel in distress, and he is a modern-day knight in shining armor. Nancy tries to compose herself. She can take all the time she needs. Ray has a fair idea already what she's going to say. The case has been splashed all over the newspapers, but he's about to hear it from her own immaculately made-up lips. Nancy pulls herself together and launches into her story. Her father is, or was, the multimillionaire Sir Harry Oakes. Oakes made his fortune as a prospector when he discovered what many believe to be the richest gold mine in the world in northern Ontario. A few days ago, the night of July 7th to be precise, Oakes was murdered at one of his homes in the Bahamas. The man accused of murdering Oakes is none other than Nancy's husband, Count Marie Alfred Foucault de Médigny, otherwise known as Freddie. The two men had fallen out. Oakes didn't approve of his daughter's marriage to the French aristocrat de Médigny, whom he saw as a feckless playboy and something of a sexual predator. At 33, de Médigny is 15 years older than Nancy. But Nancy had fallen head over heels in love with the dashing yachtsman when she was still a freckled-faced girl. The two had married just weeks after her 18th birthday, without her parents' knowledge. Nancy swears Freddie is innocent. Whatever else he is, he's not a murderer, she insists. Ray is skeptical, but he agrees to take on the case on one condition. If I find evidence of your husband's guilt, I will not conceal it or twist it. I'll turn it over to the prosecution. Nancy is mildly relieved. Ray Schindler is on the case. If anyone can clear Freddie's name, he can. For Ray, this will prove to be the biggest case of his career. Journalists from around the world will descend on the Bahamas to cover it. Ray will come up against powerful individuals with vested interests. His considerable skills will be tested to the limit. And all the while, a man's life depends on what he discovers. It's a setup straight out of detective noir, with all the hallmarks of a classic case, except this one really happened. My name is Mark Dodson, and welcome to Detectives Don't Sleep. Each week we'll shadow the world's most remarkable sleuths, real detectives who worked extraordinary cases. In this episode, we're tailing Ray Schindler, an esteemed PI who dared to probe a murder in paradise. That's the thing about great detectives. They dare. Theirs is an obsessive desire to uncover the truth. That's what keeps them awake at night and never lets them rest until they've closed the case. From Noiser, this is part 1 of Murder in Paradise. And this is Detectives Don't Sleep. So, who killed the millionaire Harry Oakes? His son-in-law Freddie? Or someone else entirely? Ray's first move is to head south, to Florida. In Miami, he boards a Pan American Airlines flying clipper ship. It's bound to Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas. It wasn't long ago people thought Zeppelins were the future of commercial aviation. Flying by seaplane? What a novelty. The silver plane gleams in the sunlight as it leaves the grand hotels of Miami Beach behind, its twin propeller engines throbbing monotonously. Now remember, this is 1943. That being the case, far away in Europe, Africa, and Asia, World War II is raging. Pearl Harbor was 18 months ago, and the war in the Pacific is well underway. But on board the flight, there isn't the slightest indication. Most of the passengers are wealthy holidaymakers. This is the era when people dress up to travel. The men are in linen suits and Panamas. The women in colorful two-piece outfits with matching wide-brimmed hats. As everyone else chatters away excitedly, Ray sits quietly in his window seat, poring over a bulging file of press cuttings and reports. The murder of Harry Oakes is making headlines all over the world. In Britain, it's knocked the war off the front page of the Times. A global conflagration? Old news. A man has been murdered in Nassau. That's the big story on Fleet Street. The report in the New York Times is typical of many, headed, "Son-in-law held in Oakes murder." It goes on. Nassau, Bahamas. July 9, Alfred de Medigny, 36, was booked at the police station here tonight on the charge of killing his father-in-law, the multimillionaire British baronet Sir Harry Oakes. A formal charge of murder was placed against the bearded accused, who denied any connection with the slaying. The charge against de Medigny came as a sensational climax to the death of Sir Harry, one of the world's richest men, with a fortune estimated to be as great as $200 million. The paper quotes Captain E.W. Melchin of the Miami Police Department, who had been called in to help with the investigation. Melchin says that the case against de Medigny rests on hair analysis, fingerprints, and interrogation. On the face of it, the evidence seems stacked against Freddie. Ray'll have his work cut out if he's going to prove him innocent. In most accounts, Freddie de Medigny is portrayed as something of a playboy, the kind of man no father would want their young daughter to marry. And everything Ray reads makes him distrust de Medigny. He's even suspicious of the title he claims to have. Is he really an aristocrat? After all, anyone can call himself a count. There's also a rumor de Medigny wasn't divorced from his previous wife when he married Nancy. Ray makes a note to call the office to get someone to dig deeper. If Freddie's a fraud and a bigamist, maybe he could also be a murderer. It's a 70-minute flight from Miami to Nassau. Plenty of time for Ray to familiarize himself with the details of the case, as the perfectly mannered cabin crew served daiquiris to the travelers. The big question for Ray is motive. Freddie's portrayed as a fortune hunter. The assumption is that he married Nancy for the money she would one day inherit, and that he killed her father for the same reason. But Ray is thorough. He's already had his researcher look into this claim. Turns out that Nancy won't inherit until she's 35. If Freddie was hoping to get his hands on the Oaks fortune immediately, well, he's in for a nasty surprise. But it's more likely that Freddie knew this already, which makes the money motive tenuous, to say the least. Besides, the file shows that Freddie is a successful businessman in his own right. He owns a lucrative chicken farm on the island, as well as several properties and an expensive racing yacht. On the face of it, he's hardly a typical fortune hunter, though Ray doesn't rule out the possibility of hidden money problems. Ray's team have also put together background information on the victim. It's quite a story. Ray settles back to soak it in. Despite the New York Times describing him as British, Harry Oaks was American by birth. He was born in the small town of Sangerville, Maine, in 1874, making him 69 at the time of his death. He came from a respectable middle-class family. When he was a student at Bowdoin College, Oaks boasted that he was going to make $1 million. It wasn't until 1896 that he knew how he was going to do it. That was the year gold was discovered in northwest Canada, and the Klondike Gold Rush began. Oaks was bitten by the bug. In 1897, at age 23, he headed north to look for gold himself, bankrolled by his family. For 13 long years, Oaks experienced failure, humiliation, despair, and near bankruptcy. Finally, in 1916, Oaks' luck changed. He struck the richest seam of gold ever found in Canada, breaking all the records set during the Klondike era. Harry Oaks was on his way to becoming a very rich man indeed. But prospecting for gold is a lonely occupation. The lean years had taken their toll on him. The optimistic young man had turned into a surly and suspicious loner. By all accounts, he was blunt and bad-mannered, with a hair-trigger temper. Despite this, Oaks acquired a wife, marrying Eunice McIntyre in 1923. She was half his age and as gregarious as he was sullen. Around this time, Oaks renounced his U.S. citizenship and took a British passport, possibly to avoid American taxes. In 1934, Oaks moved his family to the Bahamas. He was afraid that the Canadian government was going to come after him for up to 80 or 90% of his profits. The Bahamian tax regime, on the other hand, was far more welcoming. In fact, he would pay virtually no tax at all. For all his private beaches, luxury hotels, and idyllic mansions, the Bahamas at this time has a reputation for lawlessness. Its most recent boom industry had been smuggling booze into America during Prohibition, a throwback to the island's heyday in the 17th and 18th centuries as a base for pirates. Although it's a British colony, it's far enough away from London to escape rigorous oversight. In fact, the mandarins in the colonial office barely give it a second thought, which means those in power in Nassau can pretty much do what they like. Now, by 1943, it's a magnet for a wealthy white elite an emerging tax haven where you can wait out the war and hold on to your millions. Oakes also had a record of philanthropy. His good works earned him a baronetcy in 1939 when he became Sir Harry Oakes. Born in 1924, Nancy was the Oakes' first child. She always was her father's favorite. And now it's her husband in the frame for her father's murder. How about that for family drama?
This May, on the Noiser Podcast Network, Real Vikings concludes as the epic excursions of the Norsemen culminate in a monumental showdown. On Short History of, we'll witness the world-changing events of the Spanish Civil War and uncover the real James Bond. On Real Survival Stories, a remarkable tale of escape from a devastating earthquake in China and an extraordinary encounter with a humpback whale. And in Sherlock Holmes' short stories, we're amidst the misty expanse of Dartmoor for one of Conan Doyle's most beloved works, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Get all of these shows and more early and ad-free on Noiser Plus. And by the way, A Short History of Ancient Rome. Noiser's first book is out now in paperback, available in all good bookshops.
All right, so that's what Ray has to work with. The victim, Harry Oakes, prospector turned investor. The chief suspect, his playboy son-in-law, Freddie de Medigny. The setting, Nassau, where behind the veneer of tropical luxury lurk shadowy networks of financiers and criminals. Ray looks out the cabin window, down at the aquamarine waters of the Gulf Stream. Vibrant colored reefs come into view. A flock of flamingos take flight at the approach of the plane, a pink cloud exploding in the air. The palm-fringed harbor of Nassau draws near, the surface of the water littered with diamonds. The island of New Providence is laid out like an artist's palette, filled with color, golden beaches, turquoise sea, and foaming surf. The lush green of the semi-tropical interior, all the colors of paradise. But somewhere in that paradise, there's a room stained with blood. The plane comes in to land on the water. As soon as he disembarks, Ray gets down to work on the investigation. It's straight out of the Clipper and onto the dock, bathed in Caribbean sun. Hurrying through Nassau, there's little time for leisure. No time to stop at the market stalls on the busy street lined with palm trees and whitewashed wooden dwellings. One of the first people Ray speaks to is a lawyer called Ernest Callender. He's part of the defense team Nancy has hired. Callender is a native Bahamian. He speaks with a deep, gently accented voice and is easy to spot in a brilliant white suit. Ray quizzes Callender about the case. What does he think his client's chances are of getting off? Callender just shrugs. It's not going to be easy. Minds are made up. It's not so much the evidence against Freddie as the prejudice. As a Frenchman with a reputation as a libertine, Freddie doesn't really fit in with the English-speaking Bahamian establishment. He says that Ray wouldn't believe some of the gossip making the rounds. One rumor is that Oakes was killed in an Obeah ritual, a local form of a belief system more commonly called voodoo. His body was covered in feathers before being set on fire. Chickens are sometimes sacrificed in Obeah rites, either to ward off evil spirits or cause harm. Ray lets out a low whistle, then presses Callender on whether he thinks there's any truth in it. It's true there were feathers, Callender confirms, and also true that the body was set on fire. The killer had even doused it in accelerant to make sure the flames took. Ray speculates that if the Obeah theory is true, then surely that puts Freddie in the clear. Ray presumes Calendar's client is not a practitioner of ritual magic. Calendar is noncommittal. The problem is, he explains, Freddie doesn't do himself any favors. His lifestyle has made him unpopular on the island. There's talk of naked orgies, though Calendar insists it's all greatly exaggerated. But Freddie's just rubbed too many powerful people up the wrong way. The case against him may be flimsy, but the fact is, he's a convenient scapegoat. Ray's heard enough rumors. It's time to hear the story from the man himself. He heads to the local jail to talk to the Count. Ray is admitted to the cell where Freddie's being held. Tall and athletic, with a muscular physique, the dark-haired aristocrat regards him with an arrogant tilt of his head. When he finds out that Ray's a private investigator hired by Nancy, he's not impressed. In his opinion, getting Ray involved is just a waste of time and money. As for the crime he's accused of, Freddie seems to think the whole thing's a joke. Of course he didn't kill Harry Oakes. Admittedly, he couldn't stand the stupid fool, but he didn't want him dead. Only an idiot would think that. Ray interrupts his rant. If that's the case, why have the police arrested him? Freddie claims he's an easy fall guy. He'd argued with Oakes and married his daughter. Nancy was always Daddy's little girl. Ray brings the conversation round to Harry Oakes' wealth. Freddie shrugs as if he couldn't care less. He tells Ray that Oakes had offered to give him a house and set him up in business as the president of a bank he'd bought. But he turned both offers down. He already had a house, so he didn't need another one. And as for the business proposal, he says, "I'm not a banker, I'm a farmer." Again, Freddie's proud independence doesn't fit with the motive of killing Oakes for his money. Besides, why would he kill him now? Freddie hasn't even spoken to his father-in-law for 3 months, and he was nowhere near Oakes' house, Westbourne, the night he was murdered. Freddie claims he's been framed. The governor of the Bahamas has been out to get him ever since Freddie was heard making insulting remarks about him in public. This mention of the governor intrigues Ray. Now listen close. When we say governor, we're not talking about some pencil-pushing bureaucrat. This governor of the Bahamas is none other than the former British King, Edward VIII. Emphasis on former. These days, he's just the plain old Duke of Windsor. Edward became king on the death of his father, George V, in January 1936. But he reigned for just 11 months, giving up the throne in December that same year, when his brother George VI took over. Ray's researcher had included some background on the Duke in the file, but Ray knows his story well enough. The abdication of Edward was big news all over the world, especially in America, as the purported reason he gave up his crown was to be with an American, the divorcee Wallis Simpson. In his abdication speech, he famously said, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." But there's more to the story. What's less well known is that figures in the British establishment helped encourage Edward out of the door, at least in part because of his and Simpson's pro-Nazi leanings. The former king and his new bride have even spent time in Nazi Germany, meeting Adolf Hitler and inspecting SS troops. There are whispers in Nassau that Winston Churchill himself was among those who pushed for Edward to be sent across the Atlantic to get him away from the Nazis in Europe. Edward's appointment to the governorship in 1940 caused much excitement in the Bahamas, though the Duke himself was less enthusiastic. In a letter to his lawyer, he described it as this wretched appointment and stated that he regarded it with profound gloom and despondency. Despite the fact that he's a reluctant governor, the Duke of Windsor is a powerful man on the island, and apparently someone Freddie has offended. But could he really be responsible for framing him? And if that's the case, how will Ray prove it? Ray checks into the British Colonial Hotel, the most elegant and expensive accommodations on the island, naturally. It's a grand beachside palace built on the site of the old fort of Nassau. He sets up operations in his hotel room. Street noises drift up as the lace curtains flutter in the breeze. Horse-drawn carriages still outnumber motor cars on Nassau's streets. They pass by beneath his open window. From time to time, a native mockingbird in a nearby tree disturbs his chain of thought. But with room service on hand to cater to Ray's every need, there could be worse places to work. The first thing he does is call his office. He wants his researchers to dig more into Freddie's background. Is he really a count? Could he possibly be a bigamist? Ray asks them to look for evidence he actually divorced the last Mrs. de Médigny. Then he makes contact with the local police force. The officer he speaks to sighs heavily when Ray tells him the reason he's calling. The man says he can't help him. The case has been taken over by 2 detectives from Miami, Captains Melchin and Barker, who were brought in by the governor. Ray remembers reading about Melchin on the plane. He asks the local officer about the evidence against Freddie, especially the fingerprints. But the other man is tight-lipped. He suggests Ray speaks to the American detectives. Ray gets the impression the Bahamian cops aren't too happy about having the case taken off them. Ray asks the cop outright if he believes Freddie killed Harry Oakes. The cop is evasive, but it seems he thinks Freddie is innocent. Ray presses him. So who did kill Oakes? The police officer clams up. Then he tells Ray that if he's got any sense, that's a question he won't ask. The people who know the answer aren't going to talk, and just bringing it up could be bad for his health. Ray tries to unravel the unsettling conversation. The police seem to be suggesting that someone powerful may be behind the murder. Who could that be? Ray's first thought is the governor. After all, Freddie has already intimated that the man hates him. Okay, is it really possible that the former British king could be a murderer? Or even just implicated in some kind of conspiracy to murder? It's a mind-boggling thought. But Ray can't get the idea out of his head. The governor's handling of the case raises too many questions. For example, why did he bring in 2 outside detectives in the first place? American police have no jurisdiction in the Bahamas. So they could only be there in an advisory capacity. And yet they seem to have taken over the case, so much so that the local police are upset about it. Ray checks the briefing file for an explanation. He finds a note written by his extremely thorough researcher. The governor had recently visited Miami on an official trip. Captain Melchin was assigned to escort him. The 2 had gotten on famously, the governor describing Melchin in glowing terms. So, is the governor trying to control the investigation through 2 tame detectives? If so, why? It's not necessarily because he's mixed up in the murder. He could simply be trying to minimize any scandal and get back at Freddie for insulting him. Or he could be trying to protect someone else, the real murderer. One thing's for sure. If people are afraid or unwilling to talk, then it's going to make Ray's job even harder. Ray needs to get a handle on the social circles Oakes and Freddie moved in. From the background information his researchers have provided him with, it's clear there's one man he needs to talk to. The governor may be the former royal, but there's someone else they call the King of the Bahamas, a real estate tycoon by the name of Harold Christie. Christie was Harry Oakes' business partner in the Bahamas, and the closest thing Oakes had to a friend. And how about this for a coincidence? Christie was even staying in Oakes' house the night of the murder, in a room very close to Oakes. In fact, it was separated only by an adjoining bathroom. The files from the local cops states that Oakes was murdered by repeated blows to his head with a sharp object that has so far not been found. The attack must have generated considerable noise. Most likely, Oakes cried out. Even if he didn't, the fatal blows couldn't have been administered in silence. And yet, Christie insists that he heard nothing, even though he was right next door the whole time. He also claims that he knew nothing about the fire in Oakes' room. Somehow, the acrid smell of smoke failed to reach him. Ray finds all this hard to believe. Well, you would, wouldn't you? It doesn't add up. Christie was the last person to see Oakes alive that night, and the one who discovered his body in the morning. Is it really possible that he knows nothing about what happened in between? Christie's an influence peddler on the island, hobnobbing with the white elite who run the colony. He has the governor's ear, and if the rumors are to be believed, all the local politicians in his pocket. Nothing happens without Harold Christie's knowing about it. So it seems strange that he's completely in the dark about something that took place right under his nose. Ray's researcher has also discovered that the so-called King of the Bahamas may have an unsavory past. There are rumors he was arrested in the States for bootlegging during Prohibition. The story is, he fled to the Bahamas and made a killing buying up land off poor black locals at knockdown prices, then selling it on to Americans for a huge profit. It's likely that Christie has his fingers in a lot of very dubious pies. His name's been linked to a Swedish industrialist called Axel Wenner-Gren, a prominent figure in Nassau. Wenner-Gren is also a close friend of the governor. Awkwardly for the governor, this guy, Wenner-Gren, he counts Hermann Goering among his other friends. You heard it right, the Hermann Goering, head of the Luftwaffe, and only the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany. Alarmed by the connection, British Secret Services have already looked into Wenner-Gren's background. They came to the conclusion that the Swede is a Nazi agent. And the fact that Wenner-Gren is pals with the governor of the Bahamas? Remember, the former King Edward has long been suspected of Nazi leanings. It appears that being away from Europe may not have altered his sympathies. Ray's head is reeling. Christie, Wenner-Gren, Goering, the governor. What's going on? Could the reason Harry Oakes was murdered have something to do with enemy agents? Perhaps it's nothing to do with Freddie de Medigny at all. Is Ray tiptoeing around a massive Nazi conspiracy? As if that wasn't enough to take in, there's also Christie's behavior when he discovered Oakes' body. Apparently, Christie attempted to revive Oakes by fetching him a glass of water and trying to get him to drink it. Ray looks at the photographs of the wounds to Oakes' head. A spiked implement had been driven into his skull multiple times. It must have been obvious to Christie that the man was dead. The file also mentions that Christie didn't immediately call the police when he found the body. The first call he placed was to his brother. This is pretty suspicious, right? If you found your close friend murdered, wouldn't you call the cops right away? There's one other detail that catches Ray's attention. The following day, police found blood smeared on the handle of Christie's bedroom door. To say there are questions Ray'd like to put to Mr. Christie is an understatement. He places a call to Christie's real estate office to set up a meeting. The old gazebo cocktail bar on the hotel's private beach is the perfect venue for Ray's encounter with Harold Christie. Many years later, the bar will be featured in the James Bond movie Never Say Never Again, when Barbara Carrera water skis into Sean Connery's arms. So, Harold Christie slips off his bar stool to shake hands with Ray. He's got a welcoming smile in place. But somehow it doesn't seem to reach his eyes, which remain cold and wary. For all his superficial charm, Christie seems nervous. His gaze flits about the open-air bar as if he's looking for escape routes. Christie has a receding hairline with a high-domed forehead glistening with sweat. He's wearing a double-breasted suit with wide lapels and smoking an unfiltered cigarette. He watches Ray closely with his piercing green eyes. Ray asks Christie about the night Oakes was killed. Is it true that he didn't hear anything, even though his bedroom was next to the scene of the crime? Christie claims that a mosquito had gotten under his net and was distracting him. Ray's eyes widen in disbelief. He must be joking. How's that possible? Could the sounds of a mosquito really drown out the sounds of a man being beaten and burned to death? It's laughable. But Christie insists he didn't hear a thing. Ray moves the subject on to the next morning. First, he wants to know why Christie took Oakes a glass of water when it must have been obvious the man was dead. Christie claims he was in shock and he didn't know what he was doing. Was that why he called his brother before calling the police? Pushes Ray. The slick charm that Christie has shown up to now deserts him. He makes it clear that the interview is over. But Ray has one more question. Can he explain how the blood got on his door handle? Christie has an answer for that. He must have got blood on his hands when he tried to revive Oakes. But the sweat that Ray had noticed earlier is now dripping from his temples. Freddie, the governor, Harold Christie. Who's in the frame and who isn't? What's the connection? Over the next few days, Ray continues the investigation. He hears back from his head office in Manhattan. His researchers confirm that Freddie is indeed a verified French count. Not only that, the divorce papers from his previous marriage were filed before he got together with Nancy. But it is true. For a while, Freddie and his last wife continued living together after the divorce. Not everything Freddie is accused of is true, it seems, but there are plenty of half-truths to confuse an already murky story. Next, Ray visits Freddie's cousin, one George de Visdelou. He shares a house with Freddie on Victoria Road. Ray asks de Visdelou about the night of the murder and learns that the two men were in fact hosting a dinner party. There had been a tropical storm that night, which caused a power outage. Freddie had lit some candles and hurricane lamps, inadvertently burning his hand on the flame. At the end of the evening, Freddie drove two female guests back to their rented cottage. De Visdelou remembers that Freddie had tried to get some of the other men to go along with him, but no one was interested. This strikes Ray as significant. If Freddie had been planning to murder Oakes on his way back, surely he wouldn't have wanted to take witnesses along. Now, while Freddie was chauffeuring the women, Tvisdaloo took his own girlfriend home. By the time he got back, Freddie's car was already in the garage, and Freddie was in bed. Tvisdaloo parked his car behind Freddie's, blocking him in. So Freddie couldn't have gone out later to murder Oakes without getting his cousin to move his car, which didn't happen. The only opportunity Freddie had to commit the crime was on his way back from dropping the two women off. The question is, did he have enough time? Freddie has told Ray that he didn't go anywhere near Oakes' house, Westbourne, but when Ray checks with the two female party guests, he finds out that their rented cottage is not far from there. In other words, Freddie lied to him, and Ray doesn't like it when people lie to him. Ray now sets to work, testing Freddie's admittedly shaky alibi. He talks to Freddie's house servants, who tell him that it took Freddie about 45 minutes to take the woman home. It's unclear exactly when he left, but probably between 11 p.m. and midnight, meaning that he would have been back at his house no later than 1 a.m. Ray checks the file and discovers that the estimated time of death was given as between 1:30 and 4:30 a.m., which seems to put Freddie in the clear. But medical examiners can make mistakes, and the estimated time of death is just that, an estimate. Everything seems to hinge on that 45-minute car ride when Freddie took the woman home. Ray decides the only thing to do is to reconstruct the journey in Freddie's car, a Lincoln Continental coupe. Ray cruises along the coast road with the top down, the Bahamian sun glinting on the chrome work. The hiss of the surf seems to hurry him on his way. The round trip's about 14 miles. In theory, it should be possible to do it in less than 45 minutes. But the roads on New Providence are a far cry from America's fast interstate highways. The first time Ray makes the trip, he arrives back at Freddie's house with time to spare. Then he remembers that on the night of the murder, there was a raging storm. So he decides to repeat the journey on the next stormy night. Luckily, it's the middle of hurricane season in the Bahamas. Ray doesn't have long to wait. A few nights later, Ray hears the distant roll of thunder and sees a violent tropical storm approaching from the sea. When it makes landfall, he hops in Freddie's car, determined to make the journey. It's pitch dark. The wind is howling. Torrential rain hammers down on the car's canvas top. The windscreen wipers are going full pelt. Spray from the road flies up, cutting down visibility even more. The car bumps over potholes and aquaplanes around corners. The headlights of cars coming in the opposite direction streak the night. Their blaring horns set his nerves on edge. Ray is forced to drive at a snail's pace. Not surprisingly, the round trip takes much longer than the first attempt. Ray's pretty sure Freddie wouldn't have had time to stop off at Westbourne, somehow get in without anyone seeing him, beat Harry Oakes to death, and then get out again. If he'd shot Oakes, that might be a different matter. But this attack would have taken time. And that wasn't all he was supposed to have done, remember? The murderer also poured accelerant over Oakes' body and set it on fire before sprinkling it with feathers. Just doesn't add up. Ray's beginning to think that maybe Freddie is telling the truth after all. But has he got enough evidence to convince others? In particular, the two Florida detectives who are leading the case. What he needs is solid physical evidence, and there's only one place where he can get that. Ray decides he can't put it off any longer. It's time to take a look inside the room where Harry Oakes was murdered. Next time on Detectives Don't Sleep, in the second and final part of Murder in Paradise. Ray steps inside the murder room, where he's confronted with forensic evidence placing Freddy firmly at the crime scene. He meets two American homicide cops convinced they've got the right man. But are the Americans fixing the facts to fit their theories? Ray's investigation will meet with strong resistance, while his evidence will play a crucial part at Freddy de Medigny's trial. But will it be enough to get him off? Or will Freddy hang for a crime Ray is increasingly convinced he didn't commit? That's next time on Detectives Don't Sleep. It's a sunny day in early August, 1943. We're in Nassau, the capital city of the Bahamas. The Caribbean sun beats down from a clear blue sky. Private investigator Ray Schindler takes a short drive in a gleaming Lincoln Continental Coupe convertible. The 4.8-liter engine purrs soothingly as he navigates the palm tree-lined streets with the top down. The car isn't Ray's. It belongs to Count Marie Alfred Foucault de Medigny, Freddy to his friends. But Freddy doesn't have much use for it at the moment. He's locked up in a police cell, accused of murdering his father-in-law, the multimillionaire Sir Harry Oakes, and Ray's doing everything he can to get him off. So Freddy doesn't object to him using his car now and then, if it'll help. Ray turns into a driveway. The sign at the gate says Westbourne. Ray looks up at the house he's heard so much about, but is now seeing for the first time. Sir Harry Oakes' colonial-style mansion. It was here, at Westbourne, that Oakes was murdered, in his bedroom upstairs. The police say Freddy did it. Freddy says he didn't. He claims that he was at home, in bed, when Oakes was killed. Ray's beginning to believe he may be telling the truth. He's come here today to see if he can prove it. Inside the property, Ray may find the evidence to confirm Freddy's innocence. Alternatively, what he discovers may bolster the prosecution's case and help condemn his client to death. Either way, Ray will go wherever the evidence leads. But can other more powerful individuals be trusted to do the same? My name is Mark Dodson. From Noiser, this is part 2 of Murder in Paradise. And this is Detectives Don't Sleep. Oakes' house, Westbourne, has an abandoned air about it. A blaze of pink bursts over the walls. Bougainvillea are in full bloom. Kind of out of control is more like it. It almost swamps the building. The shutters on the ground floor windows are down, closing the interior off from the prying eyes of sightseers with a taste for the macabre. A wooden balcony runs along the whole of the upper story. The perfect place to sit and enjoy a sundowner or two. At least it was before the murder. Ray calls out as he mounts the steps to the entrance. A moment later, the front door is open and he's greeted by two men. These must be Captain Edward Melchin and Captain James Barker from the Miami Police Department. It's a little odd they're here at all, given the Bahamas is a British colony, and certainly doesn't fall under Miami police jurisdiction. At 50 years old, Captain Edward Melchin is an experienced detective with over 500 homicide cases to his name. Short and stocky, Melchin's body language exudes confidence. He eyes Ray complacently from behind a pair of silver wire framed glasses. Ray's seen his type before, the type who are so sure they're right. They've closed their minds to any other possibility. In Ray's experience, this is rarely the sign of a good detective. Melchin's partner is Captain James Barker, and he's about 10 years younger, taller, and leaner. Barker is a forensics expert. His specialty is fingerprints. If anything, he seems even more confident than Melchin, with a condescending smirk permanently in place. The two men are offhand with Ray. They make it clear they've got more important things to do than talk to a PI. As the two homicide detectives take Ray upstairs, they remind him of the strict conditions placed on his investigation. It's true. Ray has been granted permission by the prosecuting attorney to examine the crime scene, but he's not allowed to look for evidence against any other suspect. He has to limit himself to finding proof of Freddy's innocence. Ray asks the two cops how they can be so sure they've got their man. Melchin says he knew it as soon as he examined Freddy's hands and wrists with a magnifying glass. He could clearly see that some of his hairs were singed, proof he set the fire in the dead man's room. Ray remembers the conversation he had with Freddy's cousin. He told him about Freddy burning himself when he lit some hurricane lamps on the night of the murder. He tells Melchin the cop won't entertain the idea. At last, they reach the crime scene. Ray stands on the threshold for a moment. He takes a deep breath and steps forward into the room where Harry Oakes was brutally murdered. Even though he's an experienced detective, Ray is shaken by the grim sight that meets his eyes. Bloodstains smear the walls. Rust-colored marks spot the carpet, and places pooling into larger areas of darkness. Taking a closer look at his surroundings, Ray's attention is caught by some distinctive scorching on the wallpaper. The marks are uniform and seem unusually focused, as if caused by a narrow blast of flame pointing in one direction. To Ray's eye, it looks like somebody used a blowtorch. And yet, no mention of this has been made in the report made by the Miami detectives. Is it negligence? Or worse, a cover-up? If they failed to notice this potentially important evidence, what else have they missed? Or willfully chosen to ignore? The focal point of the destruction is the bed. By now, Oakes' body has been removed, but the evidence of what was done to it is still there in the blood-soaked mattress, which is also badly charred. The mosquito net around the bed hangs in blackened tatters. A glass with Oakes' false teeth in it still stands on the bedside table. As Ray takes in the gruesome scene, the two cops watch him like hawks. Ray doesn't let him intimidate him. He crosses to one of the windows and draws their attention to some bloody handprints on the glass. He asks them if they've identified who they belong to. Captain Barker replies, "The fingers were stubby, and the Medinese were not, so we dismissed them." Ray now knows for sure that the American detectives have deliberately ignored evidence that may indicate another suspect. The question is, why? Do they genuinely believe they have enough evidence to prove that Freddy was Oakes' murderer? Or have they been directed to come to that conclusion right from the outset? If that's the case, who's directing them? To Ray's mind, the most likely answer is the governor. He did, after all, intervene personally to bring the Americans in. Okay, let's stop for a moment to think about this. Now remember that in 1943, the governor of the Bahamas is not some faceless bureaucrat. He's the Duke of Windsor, the former British King Edward VIII, a man with power and influence that extends far beyond the island's sandy beaches. But why on earth would he want to involve himself in some backwater murder investigation? Is it possible that he's gotten involved in the Oakes case because he has something to hide? Or is he perhaps protecting someone close to him? Ray's asking himself these very questions, but for now decides to keep them under his hat. Wouldn't you? He may be the best private detective money can buy, but he's no match for the British monarchy. Instead, he turns his attention back to the crime scene. He asks Melchin and Barker if they found any proof that Freddie was there the night Oakes was murdered. Barker's smirk cranks up a notch. He shows Ray a wooden Chinese screen from which he claims he lifted a print of de Médigny's little finger. Lifted is the term used when a forensic expert uses adhesive tape to remove a fingerprint from an object so that it can be taken away and examined. It doesn't prove that Freddie was the murderer, but it does suggest that he was there that night. If so, Freddie knows more about the murder than he's been letting on. Now, Ray doesn't know if he can trust his client anymore. Usually, when that happens, it's time to walk away from a case. Ray Schindler isn't a quitter. He's pretty sure someone's lying to him, and he's determined to find out who.
This May, on the Noiser Podcast Network, Real Vikings concludes as the epic excursions of the Norsemen culminate in a monumental showdown. On Short History of, we'll witness the world-changing events of the Spanish Civil War and uncover the real James Bond. On Real Survival Stories, a remarkable tale of escape from a devastating earthquake in China and an extraordinary encounter with a humpback whale. And in Sherlock Holmes' short stories, we're amidst the misty expanse of Dartmoor for one of Conan Doyle's most beloved works, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Get all of these shows and more early and ad-free on Noiser Plus. And by the way, A Short History of Ancient Rome. Noiser's first book is out now in paperback, available in all good bookshops.
Back in his hotel, Ray calls Freddie's wife, Nancy. She's staying with her mother in Bar Harbor, Maine. Nancy is his employer, after all, the one who gave him the task of clearing her husband of her father's murder. Ray needs to break the news about the incriminating fingerprint, as difficult as it'll be for her to hear. But to his surprise, Nancy doesn't seem particularly dismayed. She tells Ray that the day after Oakes' funeral, she and her mother received a visit from Melchin and Barker in person. Captain Barker told them that Freddie's prints were all over the crime scene. Now, this contradicts what Barker told Ray. He said he'd only been able to lift a single fingerprint from Freddie's little finger off the Chinese screen. Ray would hardly describe a single fingerprint as all over the crime scene. He asked Nancy if she's sure that's what Barker said. She insists that Barker claimed he found as many as 4 of Freddie's prints. What struck her as odd is that this seemed to be news to Captain Melchin too. He let out an audible gasp when Barker revealed the information. Ray agrees, it's very odd. It's almost as if Barker was just making it up on the spot. Now Ray realizes that the whole case against Freddie hinges on the pinky print. It's the only piece of evidence tying him to the crime scene. So he decides to call in a fingerprint expert of his own. Captain Maurice O'Neill is a highly respected and experienced investigator. Like Melchin and Barker, he's an American cop. In fact, he's been the chief of the New Orleans Bureau of Investigation for the last 18 years. O'Neill flies to Nassau to review Barker's work in person. He's not impressed. For one thing, O'Neill doesn't even understand why Barker felt it necessary to lift the fingerprints in the first place. The screen is portable, which means the print could have been left in position and analyzed more effectively. He then discovers that Barker failed to take a photograph of the fingerprint on the screen before it was lifted. He only photographed the lifted print on the adhesive tape. There's no trace of the fingerprint on the screen now. So, no proof that it was ever there. Only Barker's word. Kind of fishy, huh? It gets worse. O'Neill would expect to see the texture of the screen's grain in the background of the lifted fingerprint. But it's not there. Instead, there's a different background pattern. Small, neat, regular circles. There's no such design on the screen. So where'd the circles come from? Ray now suspects that Barker didn't lift Freddy's fingerprint from the screen as he claims. He deduces that they must have lifted it from some other object that they knew Freddy, and only Freddy, had handled. Let that sink in for a minute. Ray's expert has just found solid evidence that the cops brought in by the governor planted the fingerprint. How would two officers from Miami, with no personal connection to the case, do something so drastic? Unless, of course, they were acting on behalf of someone else. Someone who either has a personal vendetta against Freddy or just wants this whole investigation to go away, and fast. Now armed with evidence, the entire case against his client could be a setup. Ray heads to the jail where Freddy's being held. If Freddy can remember how the police got a hold of his fingerprint, Ray just might be able to save him from the gallows. Since his arrival on the island in late July, Ray's been so engrossed in the case that he's lost track of the days. But it can only have been about a week since he last saw Freddy. Even so, the detective notices a marked difference in the aristocrat's appearance since the last time he spoke with him. His face is drawn and he's lost weight. His formerly athletic physique noticeably diminished. His clothes are hanging off him and starting to look grubby. The man's arrogance has evaporated too. He looks tired and anxious, as if he hasn't been sleeping well. Dark rings circle his eyes. The seriousness of the charges he faces seems to have hit home. The date of his trial has been set for October the 18th. With every day that passes, it draws nearer, and he knows that if he's found guilty, he'll hang. No wonder he's had trouble sleeping. Before, Freddy had dismissed Ray as a needless expense. Now, he looks on him as his last hope of salvation. He hangs on his every word, fixing on him with a look of desperate pleading. Ray asks Freddy to go over the time Melchin and Barker questioned him. Freddy explains that on the day after Oakes' body was discovered, he was summoned to Westbourne, where Captain Melchin spoke to him in one of the upstairs rooms. Barker was busy somewhere else. It's not clear why the interview took place at Westbourne and not at the police station. Presumably because that's where Melchin and Barker were, and they wanted to save time. There may have been a psychological reason for it too. Maybe they wanted to unnerve Freddy by bringing him to the scene of the crime they believe he committed. Freddy recalls that Melchin asked strange, rambling questions. He did his best to answer, but the policeman didn't seem interested in what he had to say. Didn't even take notes as far as Freddy can recall. There was a table in the room with a couple of glasses and a jug of water on it. Melchin asked Freddy to pour them both a glass and insisted that Freddy take a drink. He also threw a packet of Lucky Strike cigarettes to Freddy, telling him to help himself. Shortly after, Barker poked his head around the door and asked if everything was all right. Melchin replied, yes. The interview was over, but as far as Freddy was concerned, they hadn't really talked about the case at all. A couple of hours later, he was arrested for Harry Oakes' murder. When Ray shares his information with O'Neill, his Prince guy, the New Orleans detective has a eureka moment. O'Neill is certain that the print Barker claims he lifted from the Chinese screen didn't come from there at all. Instead, it was taken from the glass of water that Freddy drank from, and he can prove it in court. Freddy's trial for the murder of Harry Oakes begins on October the 18th, 1943, in the Supreme Court of the Bahamas. Reporters from all around the world converge on Nassau for what they're calling the trial of the century. Over 100 spectators cram themselves into the courtroom to follow the proceedings. One of the first witnesses called is Harold Christie. If you remember, Christie is a close friend of the victims and was staying at Westbourne's on the night of Oak's murder. Known as the King of the Bahamas, Christie is an influential man in the islands. Ray suspects he knows far more than he's letting on. Christie is ruthlessly cross-examined by the lead defense barrister, the Honorable Godfrey Higgs, who hones in on the details that Ray has brought to light. How is it possible that Christie was not disturbed by the cries of his best friend as he was bludgeoned to death and set on fire in the next room? Sweating profusely, Christie can offer no explanation, just as he couldn't when Ray asked him the same question. He's also challenged about a glass of water he tried to make the dead man drink and the blood Ray found on the door handle to his room. Christie is clearly rattled. He loses his temper and angrily shouts at the barrister questioning him. One journalist describes his testimony as unconvincing. Captain Melchin is equally unimpressed. Junior defense lawyer Ernest Callender challenges him on the fingerprint evidence against Freddie. He brings up a detail that Ray had teased out. Melchin's apparent surprise when Captain Barker had told Nancy and her mother what he had found. Melchin admits that he didn't know that his colleague had found a fingerprint until that moment, which meant that Barker had failed to mention it during the 11 days the two men had been working on the case together before then. He hadn't even thought to bring it up as they traveled from Nassau to Maine to speak to the women. Even the judge finds this surprising and is moved to intervene. Captain Melchin, isn't it odd that he did not mention it during the journey? Much to his embarrassment, Melchin is forced to agree. It is odd, but if Captain Melchin seems unreliable as a witness, Captain Barker is a disaster. In one extraordinary incident, Barker shows the jury a blue pencil line on the Chinese screen. This line indicates where Freddie's fingerprint was lifted. Barker had previously said that he drew the line himself, as proven by the fact that his initials have been scrawled next to it. But Barker now suddenly denies under oath that he was the one to draw it. Instead, he claims that someone tampered with the evidence, drawing over his original line. The courtroom is thrown into disarray. The jury is confused. Both the prosecution and defense lawyers are stunned. The judge is even prompted to get out of his seat and approach the screen to take a closer look. As he sees the judge striding towards him, Barker swiftly goes back on his last statement, saying, "I wish to withdraw what I said about the alteration. I find my initials where the blue line is." How's that for a double U-turn? In a matter of minutes, the Floridian police captain has changed his story, then changed it right back. Barker is exposed as either incompetent or dishonest or both. Ray's own judgment on the two Miami detectives' handling of the case is scathing. In Rupert Hughes' biography of Schindler, the Complete Detective, Ray is quoted as saying, "I shall never understand how any honest investigator could have permitted this to happen." He's chosen his words carefully, but the implication seems to be that he thinks Melchin and Barker are liars. Next, it's Freddie's turn to take the stand. Newsweek's correspondent sets the scene. Once he had been debonair and reckless, winking at witnesses and waving to friends from the wooden prisoner's cage. But on November 4th, when he stood to testify under oath, de Médigny was a solemn, tight-lipped man fighting for his life. Freddie gives evidence for an exhausting 4.5 hours. To Ray's relief, there's no sign of the arrogance that the Count had shown when he first met him. He appears calm and, more importantly, credible, in stark contrast to the prosecution's main witnesses, Christie, Melchin, and Barker. Freddie's defense lawyer asks him about the time when Freddie was questioned by Captain Melchin at Westbourne. Freddie describes how Melchin had seemed more interested in getting him to drink a glass of water than answer his questions. His barrister concludes by asking him outright, "Did you kill Sir Harry Oakes?" Without missing a beat, Freddie replies, "No, sir." Freddie keeps his composure when he's cross-examined by the Crown. Even when his playboy lifestyle is placed under the microscope and he's portrayed as an unscrupulous money grabber, Freddie calmly sticks to his story. When Oakes was murdered, he was at home in bed. As Ray watches the proceedings, he can sense the mood of the courtroom swing in Freddie's favor. The prosecution's case is unraveling, but the final thread is pulled when Maurice O'Neill, the New Orleans fingerprint expert brought in by Ray, is called to give evidence. O'Neill's testimony provides the most sensational moment in the trial, with an exchange worthy of the best courtroom dramas. Defense barrister Godfrey Higgs is asking O'Neill about the circles that appear in the background of Freddie's pinky print, the one that Barker claims to have lifted from the Chinese screen. O'Neill explains that they couldn't possibly have come from there because there's no sign of any pattern like that on the screen. So Higgs asks him what could have caused the circles. With a conjurer's flourish, O'Neill reaches into his jacket pocket and whips out a glass tumbler decorated with a design of printed red circles, exactly matching those visible on the lifted print. The prosecution lawyer leaps to his feet to object, but the objection is overruled. The judge explains to the jury that the defense isn't saying that the print was lifted from this particular glass. They're just trying to show that it could have come from a similar glass. And just to be clear, at no point does the defense lawyer say that the glass Freddie handled during the interrogation had this kind of pattern. He doesn't need to. The jurors will make that leap themselves. To be honest, it's a little bit of courtroom showmanship, a sleight of hand, almost. But it makes the point. There's no proof that the incriminating print came from the screen. It could just as easily have come from a glass like the one O'Neill had produced. The strategy is designed to put doubt in the jury's mind, because the jury knows that if they have any reasonable doubt at all, they must acquit Freddie. The headline in the Nassau Daily Tribune the next day spells it out. Defense suggests evidence fabricated. In his closing statement, Freddie's lead barrister, Godfrey Higgs, tears apart the flimsy circumstantial evidence against his client, in particular, the fingerprint evidence on which the whole case rests. He also destroys the two motives that the prosecution has put forward. As Ray discovered during his investigation, there's no evidence that de Médigny was after Oakes' fortune. He is a successful businessman in his own right. And if he killed Oakes because he hated him, why had it taken him so long? He hadn't spoken to Oakes for 3 months and hadn't been to Westbourne for 2 years. Of course, Freddie may have been nurturing a simmering resentment, but there's some evidence that the differences between the two men were exaggerated. Once, after giving Freddie the rough edge of his tongue, Oakes turned to his son Sidney and said, "Not a bad sort, de Médigny. You have to get to know these Frenchies." And often, Freddie's reaction to his father-in-law's outbursts was just to shrug him off. The two men seemed to get along fine, provided they never saw each other. Higgs concludes, "I believe, gentlemen, you can return only one verdict, and that a unanimous one of not guilty." In his view, to condemn Freddie to death by finding him guilty, quote, would be a greater crime than the slaying of Sir Harry Oakes. Finally, on November the 12th, 1943, after 25 grueling days of trial, the jury retires to consider their verdict. For the death penalty to be delivered, a unanimous guilty verdict is required. But for Freddie to be acquitted, a majority decision in his favor is enough. Just under 2 hours after the jury retired, the word gets around that they've reached a verdict. Freddie's hurried back into the court to hear it. "Gentlemen, are you agreed on a verdict?" demands the registrar. "Yes, we are," answers the foreman. "How say you? Is the prisoner guilty or not guilty of the offense with which he is charged?" Not guilty. The Nassau Daily Tribune describes the reaction. Women sprang to their feet and cheered. The police shouted, "Order!" But the bedlam was unabated. Finally, they threatened to clear the court. The foreman of the jury tries to make himself heard over the noise. He delivered the verdict, but it seems he has more to say. When the judge finally manages to restore order, the foreman reveals that the verdict was split, 9-3. It's the lowest majority allowed without being a hung jury requiring a retrial. He then makes an extraordinary statement. Although the jury have found Freddie not guilty, they've attached a condition to the acquittal. They demand that Freddie be immediately deported from the Bahamas. Hang on a second. What exactly are they saying? Deported? As in kicked out of the country? For what? The very same jury has literally just found him not guilty. As the judge makes clear, there's no legal basis for such a condition. It cannot be enforced. So why'd the jury make it? It seems that the bizarre rider was a compromise brought about to avoid a mistrial. 4 of the jurors are members of the strict puritanical sect, the Plymouth Brethren. They were very influenced by all the salacious gossip about Freddie, some of which found its way into the prosecution's case. They seemed to believe that even if Freddie wasn't guilty of murdering Oakes, he was guilty of being a disreputable scoundrel. So, for a long time, the 4 Puritans held out against acquitting Freddie. The jury was split 8-4, which would result in a new trial, something everyone was keen to avoid. Eventually, the most moderate of the Plymouth Brethren was persuaded to change his verdict to not guilty. In return, it was agreed that the jury would add the demand for Freddie's deportation. Although the condition has no legal standing, it has one very important supporter. The governor of the Bahamas, Edward, the Duke of Windsor, had taken himself away from the island for the duration of the trial. He reveals his reasons in a letter to the Secretary of State for the colonies. He says, "I purposely absented myself and the Duchess from the colony during the de Médigny trial to avoid adverse publicity. I did not want to be dragged into sordid and vulgar daily newspaper reports." Another way of looking at it is that he didn't want anyone criticizing his decisions, especially the one to bring in the now discredited American cops. Also, if he wasn't around, he couldn't be called on to testify. Now that the trial is over, the Duke takes a keen interest in the outcome, throwing his weight behind the highly irregular call for deportation. Perhaps he wants Freddie out of the way, knowing that the disgruntled Count continued to be a thorn in his side, and presumably continue to make insulting remarks at his expense. Within hours of the verdict, an official request for a deportation order is cabled to the Colonial Office in London. The request is turned down. Freddie is free to remain in the Bahamas. After Freddie is acquitted on November the 12th, defense lawyer Godfrey Higgs throws a party in his client's honor. Ray's invited. He takes along one of the experts he called in to help him work the case. The surprise guest is Leonard Keeler, the inventor of the polygraph machine. As it happens, Keeler played no active part in the investigation. Ray may not have realized that, unlike in certain American states, polygraph evidence is not admissible under UK law, which is the legal system in the Bahamas. Still, Keeler gets to go to the party, and Ray has him bring his invention along, just for fun. They play a little parlor game. Keeler wires guests up to the lie detector and asks them embarrassing questions. You know, that sort of thing. Did you eat the last piece of cake? Or are you wearing any underwear? Have you ever cheated on your wife? Ray suggests Freddie has a go. It's a chance to prove his accusers wrong once and for all. Freddie flashes the detective a warning look and shakes his head angrily. He came here to relax and put the trial behind him. The last thing he wants to do is bring it all up again. But Ray won't let it go. He challenges Freddie. If he's got nothing to hide, he's got nothing to fear. The machine doesn't lie, even if the person wired up to it does. And Mr. Keeler is the world's best polygraph operator. Freddie couldn't be in safer hands. Now the other guests join in, egging him on with the usual drunken chant, "Do it, do it, do it." They may be Freddie's friends, most of them, but even they have a lingering suspicion. They want the question settled beyond a doubt. Did he do it? Eventually, Freddie sees there's only one way to shut him up. He agrees to do the test. It takes a few moments for Keeler to set up the various bits of kit that will register Freddie's responses. The inflatable tube around his arm for blood pressure, the electrodes on his skin for conductivity. Keeler starts off by firing him a few soft questions. Then, at Ray's prompting, hits him with the big one. Did you kill Harry Oakes? The room falls silent. Somewhere, someone gasps. Everyone holds their breath as they wait for Freddie's answer. Finally it comes. No. Freddie's voice is calm but firm. He doesn't blink or look away as he gives his answer. Everyone leads forward to see if the polygraph bears him out. He's telling the truth, announces Keeler. There's a huge cheer from the other guests. They crowd in to pat Freddie on the back. The very people who a moment ago wondered if he might be a brutal murderer are now falling over themselves to say they never doubted him. Freddie may have passed the polygraph test at the party, but he remains the only person ever charged in connection with the death of Sir Harry Oakes. The police close the investigation. One gets the impression that those in authority want the Bahamas to move on from this unfortunate affair as quickly as possible. The residents, on the other hand, remain hungry for answers. As one female socialite remarks, I'll always have to wonder if I'm dancing with the murderer of Sir Harry Oakes. And although Freddie's not deported, after his ordeal, the island paradise suddenly seems a lot less hospitable. The hostility towards the expat elite, which had always been there in the background, is now out in the open. The jurors who called for his deportation spoke for many. People just don't seem to like Count Alfred de Ménigny. Eventually, reluctantly, Freddie leaves the Bahamas. He and Nancy attempt to make a new life in Cuba as guests of his friend Ernest Hemingway. But their marriage isn't able to withstand the trauma of the Oakes murder and Freddie's trial. The couple soon separate. Freddie becomes something of a drifter, moving around the Americas before settling in Houston, where he dies in 1998 at the ripe old age of 87. But the question remains, if Freddie de Ménigny didn't kill Harry Oakes, who did? It's a question Ray Schindler was never hired to answer. His brief was simply to prove Freddie's innocence, and in that, he succeeded. But the mystery continues to obsess him. In 1944, Ray writes an article for Inside Detective magazine entitled, "I Could Crack the Oaks Case Wide Open." In it, he reveals that he has offered his services to the governor of the Bahamas to find the real murderer. His offer was declined. Perhaps the Duke has reasons of his own for not wanting the case reopened. In Murder Midas, Charlotte Gray's 2019 book about the case, the author reveals an intriguing detail. Remember when Melchin was interviewing Freddie at Westbourne and encouraged him to handle a glass of water? Citing the Nassau Daily Tribune as her main source, Gray reveals that while that was going on, there was someone else present in the house, the governor himself. You heard right. Edward, the Duke, was actually in the murder room, conferring with Captain Barker, while the main suspect was being grilled. According to Gray, the two men spoke for 20 minutes. What on earth did they talk about? This has never been revealed. Perhaps he was merely checking that the American detectives had everything they needed. We can imagine that he was impressing on Barker the need to solve the case as quickly as possible. Whether that extended to pointing the detective in the direction of the man he thought was responsible, we can't say. But we certainly have no evidence that he explicitly encouraged Barker to plant evidence. That may have all been down to Barker's own initiative and his understanding of what he thought the Duke wanted him to do. The only thing we do know for certain is that soon after their conference, Alfred de Ménigny was arrested for murder on evidence that appears to have been fabricated by the two detectives personally brought in by the governor. Now, this isn't to say that the Duke of Windsor killed Harry Oakes, merely that he may have coordinated a cover-up. But on whose behalf? One possibility is the Duke's Swedish industrial friend, Axel Wenner-Gren. Remember him? We encountered him briefly last time. He was widely suspected of being a Nazi agent. Wenner-Gren owned Hog Island, just off the north coast of New Providence, near Nassau. During World War II, he had carried out extensive works there, hiring laborers to dig canals and create a safe harbor against hurricanes. There were rumors that he was preparing the ground for a U-boat base in the Bahamas, from where Nazi invasions of the U.S. could be launched. Certainly from 1942 on, there were sightings of German submarines in the area. The theory is that Sir Harry Oakes found out about Wenner-Gren's plans and was threatening to blow the whistle. As intriguing as all this is, it's just wild speculation without any evidence to back it up. In fact, the canals that Wenner-Gren constructed were too narrow for U-boats. A more plausible suggestion is Harold Christie, the real estate mogul and so-called King of the Bahamas. And it seems likely that this is who Ray suspected, though he is careful never to put his suspicions into print. If he was involved, Christie probably didn't commit the crime himself. It's more likely he would have paid a hitman or hitmen who tried to cover their traces by setting the body on fire in a clumsy attempt to make it look like an Obeah ritual. But if that's so, what could Christie's motive have been? It has been said that there are only 4 motives for murder: lust, love, loathing, and loot. The theory is that in Christie's case, it was loot. Oakes' financial arrangements are opaque, particularly when viewed from a distance, but he was strongly motivated by a desire to avoid taxes. That's why he was in the Bahamas in the first place. It seems that Oakes had heard a rumor that the authorities were coming after him for a big chunk of his fortune. Always one step ahead, He was planning to transfer his money out of the Bahamas to Mexico. For Christie, this was bad news. Oakes had invested heavily in Christie's business, and now he wanted his money out. The speculation is that Christie didn't have the funds anymore, or maybe he just didn't want to give it back. In other words, dead men can't call in debts. Whether or not Christie was involved in Oakes' death, long after the case, he continues to live and thrive in the Bahamas. He's even knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1964 and dies in 1973. Earl Stanley Gardner, one of the journalists who covered the de Medici trial, will later describe the Oakes case as perhaps the most mysterious and baffling murder of all time. Gardner had a chance to watch Ray Schindler operate up close. As a former trial lawyer himself, Gardner had hired private investigators to help him with cases. He was well qualified to appreciate Ray's skills and qualities. Gardner describes the atmosphere of distorted rumors and feverish speculation that provided the background to the case. Throughout it all, Ray managed to keep his mental perspective. He heard everything, saw everything, and investigated everything. In Gardner's words, always his mind was cold and calm, detached and deadly, as though the man had been some calculating machine. The Oakes murder is the most high-profile case of Ray Schindler's long and varied career, but it's not the last time he succeeds in clearing the name of a man unjustly accused of murder. Ray is often portrayed as someone who enjoyed celebrity and the trappings that come with it, but he was just as much motivated by a strong sense of justice. This commitment continues to the end of his career, from 1948 to 1959. Ray collaborates with Earl Stanley Gardner on a project called The Court of Last Resort. The purpose is to investigate the cases of men convicted of murder who protest their innocence. By 1950, after only 2 years of operation, the Court of Last Resort secures the release of 3 innocent men serving sentences for murder. No doubt, his experience in the Harry Oakes case drove his future campaign for justice. And to this day, the mystery of who killed Sir Harry Oakes remains unsolved. Next time on Detectives Don't Sleep. We're in Los Angeles in the 1980s, an era of glamour and excess in the city of angels. But its glittering facade often hides dark secrets. When Detective Leslie Zoller of the Beverly Hills Police Department receives a missing persons report, he initially assumes it'll be an easy case. He'll ask a few questions, put up a few posters, and be done with it. Little does he know, he's about to embark on one of the strangest investigations of his career. Soon, his search for a missing person will become a hunt for a killer as he unravels a stranger-than-fiction conspiracy with a shadowy group at its center, known as the Billionaire Boys Club.